Good evening. My name is Uwe Brandis. I'm professor of practice here at Georgetown University, and welcome to this really exciting conversation that we're going to have tonight. What I'd like to do is start off by introducing our speakers, and then I have some opening remarks. This conversation is part of a larger series being held at the School of Continuing Studies on the impact of artificial intelligence technologies on individual professional disciplines. And we're here tonight to explore how AI is impacting cities and the profession of urban planning. We have an all-star crew with us tonight, and I'm going to just very quickly walk through this list. We're joined by Frederic Lemieux, Ph.D., professor of practice here at Georgetown University, chair of the working group on artificial intelligence at the School of Continuing Studies. He's also faculty director of the Applied Intelligence, Cybersecurity Risk Management, Technology Management, and Information Technology Management programs here at SCS. Frederic received his Ph.D. in criminology from the University of Montreal. We're also joined by Lianne Plass, a member of the faculty of the Urban and Regional Planning Program here at Georgetown, and also vice chair of the Committee on Technology at the American Planning Association. She's also serves as the senior manager for urban resilience at the Urban Land Institute. Lee received her master's in urban planning from the University of Florida. Christopher Pyke, Ph.D., member of the faculty here at the Georgetown Urban and Regional Planning Program, who serves as Director of Innovation for the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark Organization, also known as GRESB. Chris is the former Chief Strategy Officer at Aclima, a Google company, and former Senior Vice President of Arc-Scoruru, and Director of Research at the United States Green Building Council. Chris received his Ph.D. in Geography from the University of California at Santa Barbara. We're joined by Matt Sokol, the Chief Data Officer of the Government of the District of Columbia in the Office of the Chief Technology Officer. Matt is also the former GIS Program Director for the State of Maryland, Department of Information Technology. Matt received his master's in science in information and telecommunication systems from Johns Hopkins University. And we're joined by Katie Wells, Ph.D., postdoctoral Fritz Fellow at Georgetown University's Tech and Society Initiative, and a fellow at the Georgetown Global Cities Initiative. She's author of the recently published book, Disrupting DC, The Rise of Uber and the Fall of the City. Katie received her Ph.D. in geography from Syracuse University. I'd like to welcome all of our speakers. So I want to kick us off here with a few remarks. And I'm going to start with this image to break the ice. So on January 12th, 2024, at 2:46 p.m., I, Uwe Brandis, entered the following prompt into DALL-E E2. A watercolor image to promote a university dialogue on the responsible use of artificial intelligence in cities. That was the prompt. And that prompt yielded this image. Now, that prompt yielded a couple of images, so there was a little bit of editorial, human editorial activity here to choose this. But that is where this image came from. And I use that as a way to start us off here to say that this agenda for this dialogue here tonight is intentionally broad. Our primary goal is to generate questions and explore avenues of inquiry. And I bet that we will not be in a position to answer all of our questions that we generate tonight. But let's marshal our critical insights and our creative imagination as we exchange ideas. Some might say we're at a key moment of inflection. Certainly, if you look or read current business and technology media, other discourse, it suggests that we might be at a key moment of inflection with the rise of the computational power available to us collectively and the available digital data sets that we have available to us. Conversely, we may think of this as an iterative point along a long arc of technology adoption within cities. Underlying the place-based infrastructures and socio-cultural norms that express themselves in cities, this might be just an ongoing state of evolution. There is, of course, extensive research and discourse happening in AI across our university, from projects in facial recognition and protections of civil liberties to questions related to geopolitical risks. But as we enter this dialogue here tonight, we do so with a particular perspective, and I would say a bias, to the subject of AI, one which prioritizes the processes of intentional planning, of developing, of building and shaping and sustaining of cities and their communities. So let's just for tonight refer to all of these activities as urban planning. As our Georgetown University Urban Regional Planning Program has been engaging AI and AI-enabled tools, we've been doing this for some time now, and I just kind of point to two examples. For several years now, I think 5+ years, we have been developing and annually evolving a course called New Urban Technologies, which Professor Pyke teaches, and we'll hear more from him about that class and the significance of that class in exploring this subject. And then secondly, our students and faculty have been using AI-enabled data platforms for some time now, for multiple years, including examples such as Placer AI, streetlight data. These are platforms that translate cell phone data to the productive use and research for urban planners. And including our long-standing relationship with Esri, the geospatial technology, and a new partnership, which I'm really excited to announce tonight, between our program and the synthetic data platform called Replica. Our program's already providing these AI-enabled tools to students and faculty, and they're using them to engage to use those tools, both for learning in the classroom and for research. And a number of preliminary proofs of concept are already quite remarkable. So as we kind of switch gears here and start this program, I do want to just share two quotes from some of the research and reading I've been doing on AI. And the first is a quote from a very recent publication entitled The Atlas of AI by author Kate Crawford. And in this book, Ms. Crawford explores the multi-dimensional impacts of AI, including the physical impact on communities and the global environment, among many other kinds of societal impact. In a particularly compelling passage, for those of us interested in the built environment, Ms. Crawford interprets her journey landing in San Jose Airport, driving past the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, driving up into the Sierras to an unincorporated mining town called Silver Peak, Nevada, all from the perspective of AI's impact on the people and places along her journey. So I highly recommend that to everyone. And in this book, she later states, quote, "Artificial intelligence is in the process of remapping and intervening in the world. It is a politics by other means, although rarely acknowledged as such." Unquote. And I want to offer a second quote, which also uses this operative word of intervene and this is a quote from within the urban planning canon, from one of our leading urban theorists. And this quote is from William Mitchell, the former dean of MIT's Department of Architecture and Urban Planning, and a director of the Smart Cities research at the MIT Media Lab. And in his 1995 book, before many of the technologies that we associate with information technology were even developed, he made this observation on the intersection of digitization and the built environment. And I quote, "Why does it matter? Why should we care about this new kind of architectural and urban design issue? It matters because the emerging civic structures and spatial arrangements of the digital era will profoundly affect our access to economic opportunities and to public services, to the character and the content of public discourse, to the forms of cultural activity, the enaction of power, and the experiences that give shape and texture to our daily routines. Massive and unstoppable changes are underway, but we are not passive subjects, powerless to shape our fates. If we, and I just want to editorialize a little bit here, he's referring to leaders of professional practice. If we understand what is happening, and if we can conceive and explore alternative futures, we can find opportunities to intervene, sometimes to resist, to organize, to legislate, to plan, and to design. So with that, let's get started. I'd like to invite Frederic to say a few words and welcome us to this series.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to say thank you to Uva for giving me the title of chair of the... I was not aware, so I will add that to my resume. So thank you for the opportunity to speak at this event. It's a privilege to discuss a topic that stands at the forefront of our rapidly evolving world, artificial intelligence, or AI, and its significance in preserving and enhancing community integrity with AI-driven cities. As you may know, this event is also related to the Responsible AI Intersectoral Seminar Series here at Georgetown School of Continuing Studies. This initiative bridges the gap between AI innovation and ethical implementation. As AI continues to integrate into diverse sectors, from supply chain to marketing, human resources to cybersecurity, the need for responsible use becomes paramount. This series gathers experts from various fields, offering interdisciplinary perspectives on how to navigate the challenges of AI deployment. Attendees gain insight into best practices, explore real-world applications, and engage in thought-provoking discussions about the future of AI in several industries. Whether you are an AI enthusiast, industry professional, or curious individual, we invite us to join us invite you to join us to explore those series. We have many coming up until, I believe, the month of May with other sectors and other industries here represented by different programs here at SCS. So what exactly is artificial intelligence? At its core, AI is a revolutionary field in computer science focused on creating machines capable of thinking, learning, and making decisions or tasks that were traditionally thought to be exclusive to human intelligence. So why is this important to us? Firstly, AI impact on society is enormous. It's transforming how we work, how we live, how we interact with our environment. And in urban management, AI is playing a pivotal role in making our cities smarter and more efficient. For instance, in Helsinki, AI is used to monitor air quality, providing real-time data to city officials and the public to address pollution and health issues. In Toronto, AI is used to analyze traffic data, pedestrian flow, and other metrics to plan infrastructure and public spaces. In Barcelona, AI monitor and control water usage and quality, detect leaks, and predict water demand to enhance water conservation efforts. In Amsterdam, AI is used to optimize energy distribution and reduce waste by predicting peak demand times and integrating renewable energy sources more effectively. Finally, in Seoul, AI is used to optimize waste collection with smart bins. These bins can compact waste automatically and notify collection services when they are full, streamlining waste management. The advancement of AI technology is not just a leap, it's a sprint into the future where the line between human and machine capabilities is increasingly blurred. While the integration of AI into urban environment offers numerous benefits, it's important to recognize the potential pitfalls of AI application saturations. For example, extensive use of surveillance systems powered by facial recognition raise serious privacy concerns and lead to a surveillance state. Traffic management systems, while optimizing flow, could lead to excessive monitoring and data collection, infringing on individual privacy. Furthermore, AI-driven decision-making in public services, if not carefully managed, can result in biases against certain communities, perpetuating inequality. Additionally, the reliance on AI for critical infrastructure, such as power grid and water supply systems, increases vulnerability to cyber attacks. Thus, as we adopt these technologies, we must ensure they are implemented with a focus on ethical standards, transparency, and community engagement to avoid these pitfalls and truly enhance city life. Most importantly, we must consider how AI impacts community integrity. How can we use AI to strengthen trust, cohesiveness, and the collective value within our communities? In conclusion, I would like to point out that AI is not just a technological phenomenon, it's a societal one. As we stand on the brink of this AI era, let's embrace the possibilities while being mindful of the responsibilities. Let's think about how we, as individuals and as a community, we can contribute to a future where AI doesn't just exist in our cities, but enhance our integrity and vitality. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Frederic. So let's kick it off. Let's enter into dialogue. And what I would like to do is structure this as a couple of rounds. Let's start with a kind of a simple round of reflections and additional self-introductions, just to kind of explore, like, how are you using AI tools today? Like, you know, let's demystify this and bring it down to the ground. Or what issues are you looking at today? And then in the second round, let's look forward and start thinking about trends and so forth. And Matt, I'd actually like to start with you. I'd like to thank you for being here. And so you are the Chief Data Officer of a big, important city. What are you working on that is AI driven today?
Well, first, thanks for having me here. I appreciate it. And looking forward to the really great conversation. So one of the things we're really focusing on, you know, with AI being sort of a little bit in specifically in the generative AI realm in its infancy, kind of in DC, is how we can make the residents' lives better, right? How can we provide them with quicker responses? As a government, we're supposed to be providing services to them. And how do we help them find things better in sort of a little bit of an alphabet soup of DC government? So one thing we're trying to do is really think about how do we enhance our presence with citizens interacting with our services, right? So even just the DC government website, right? Today, we've got some capabilities out there that allow us to now have a fully interactive chatbot that you no longer need to go to 3 different agencies' websites to find out exactly what you need in order to get a permit, apply for a job, anything, get unemployment services, right? These can all be very quickly facilitated from a simple chatbot that lives on the main DC government website, and you really don't need to go anywhere else. And not only that, but we're also working on being able to make those further accessible to people. So whether you speak a non-English language or, you know, you need to talk to it verbally, it's got those capabilities in there where we really can also enhance the accessibility, which is a lot of what residents sometimes need with those kinds of services. And then the other thing we've been focusing on a lot lately is we have an extremely big presence in the open data realm. And the interesting thing about the open data platform is it's all about providing data and information to citizens, businesses, residents, about what's going on in their city. And that could be anything from parking tickets to permits to, trash collection day. But you really still have to be someone who understands how to work with data to utilize the platform. Well, we've sort of shifted that with generative AI to start thinking about being able to leverage that question answer capability where you go and ask it and say, what tree species are on my block, right? And we return to you that information that comes directly from the data set. You don't need to know how to filter it. You don't need to know how to search it. You don't need to be a geospatial person at all. It will return it to you and can put it on a map. And if you want to find out information in Spanish, you could do that too. If you want to talk to it, you could do that too. If you want to start interacting with other data sets together, to really do a bigger picture, you can start utilizing open data in a whole new different way than you could before. And now it's really an easy way to do things. So we're really trying to simplify the process of, being able to provide government services through the use of generative AI.
That's really great. I mean, incredible change in how data is accessed, and the kind of public service associated with that. I mean, you can just imagine how big of an impact that will have. Chris, you are sitting on an extraordinary set of data that are privately generated. I'm wondering if you'd offer your reflections on kind of where you are in your work managing this incredible global data set.
Yeah, let me explain a little bit about what we do, and I'll use the opportunity to talk about both essentially the socially positive and the socially negative part about what we do. So I work for an organization that measures, tracks, and scores the sustainability of essentially the built environment and infrastructure around the world. So we track thousands of companies and the places they create, whether it's a building, a shopping mall. It could also be social housing, it could be an airport, it could be runways. So if you think about the people who invest privately in the built environment, they need tools to communicate with their investors about the relative sustainability strengths and weaknesses of what they do. And so that has at least two dimensions that interact with AI. So the result, as Eva said, it is a very large data set. We cover essentially the world of privately invested real estate, the world of privately invested infrastructure, and the world, actually we've recently expanded to a world of 9 different climate critical industries. So collectively, that's over 1 million different individual built assets on the ground, and it's $7 trillion worth of stuff, just to put it in perspective. Okay, so there's 2 different things. One is every year, thousands of companies send us information on what they're doing. Their investor says, send it to this benchmark that companies called GRESB that I work for. The thing is, we then traditionally have to validate that information. So we send it to human validators during an intensive period of the year who comb through this stuff and look at individual reports and try to indicate whether that material is what it says it is. Okay. That is a perfect AI problem. We have lots of positives and negatives, truths and falses, and we can use an AI tool to basically make that process of validating thousands of pieces of information faster and more consistent. Cool. Downside, that is and was someone's job. So that is a challenge where the skill set that a human validator is a good skill. However, over time, that will incrementally be taken over by this AI tool set because the AI is better at it at the end of the day. And so that is something that's a negative or it's a positive for the consistency and velocity of our work. It's a negative for that current workforce or going to be a driver of transition. On the other hand, today we track the sustainability of thousands, hundreds of thousands of things on the ground. We are at an inflection point where we are going to stop. We are not going to, we have been growing by measuring the sustainability of individual places and every year adding more and more and more. If you look forward in our profession over the next 3-5 years, we are going to grow by predicting the performance and iteratively validating that with AI generated models. it is going to radically change the velocity and the coverage and the depth. It's also going to change how we know about the world. So I won't, there's so much more I could say, but let me just put a bow around this. Say, there are things in the way that we understand the sustainability of the built environment that are being accelerated by AI with changes in the skills that we need accompanied by that. There are also very positive things that allow us to work at unprecedented scales and velocities that will open up entirely new horizons for us. So we see both positive and negative, and we see this playing out on a global basis.
Katie, you have studied the present day impact of not only data sets, but the platforms that organize those data sets and get translated into the delivery of services to people living in cities. Where are we today?
I'm happy to be here. Thanks, Uwe, for having me. It's great to be here. Hi, guys. I think about AI in three ways. I'll give you my three sort of models here. One, in my work as a researcher, I think about labor in terms of Chris was gesturing toward this, right? But I think about who does the labor that maintains and creates the AI systems. Those are the questions I ask. I also ask a question about regulatory capture, right? I think a lot about automated decision-making and the way in which AI, if we actually think about what it is and how it helps us to make decisions, is already operative in DC government, especially with the way that policies are enacted. There was a great report released about a year ago by EPIC about the automated decision-making programs that are already here in the District of Columbia and the extent to which they are black boxes. Black boxes both for citizen researchers, but also for policymakers to not understand how is it that a particular decision is being made. And I think that's quite dangerous as we look forward and think about accountability and placemaking. The third way in which I think about AI is with regard to, I think about it as a big, beautiful detour sign. I think about it with flashing lights, and I think about the way it distracts us from talking about the existing problems right here and right now. In the book that I recently released with two colleagues, we thought about the way in which Uber as a company mobilizes automation discourse, talk about automation and AVs as a way to distract from questions about what should we really do about congestion? What should we really do about the forever chemicals of these wheels that rub off onto our roads? And so I worry very much about talking about AI when we are not talking about that other stuff.
Lee, you are now in a national conversation on how to react here and now in terms of professional practice and the ethics of professional practice. Share with us that current conversation that you're in the middle of.
Sure. So last year around this time, the American Planning Association's technology division, we released an open letter on ethical use of AI in planning practice. When we began that conversation, we were faced with this just overwhelming amount of feedback from other city planners and those in planning adjacent professions, just expressing concerns about, what about cybersecurity? How are we locking down our data? How are we able to ensure that the public input process is it's still equitable? People are still able to provide feedback in a public venue in a fair way. We've heard all sorts of concerns about deep fakes. And so, in response to that, and plagiarism as well, and in response to that, we put out this open letter that just tries to engage with those concerns, tries to engage with some of the underlying biases in the platform, and some of the common platforms. We were dealing specifically with generative AI in this open letter. Cautioning planners to approach these tools in a way that is well informed, with ignorance not necessarily being an excuse for the allowing ethical priorities to go or rather fall to the wayside. when we wrote this open letter, we focused on the AICP Code of Ethics, which is sort of the guiding code of ethics for the American Planning Association. So if you're a certified planner, you're expected to comply with that. And so when we basically systematically went through the ethics provisions, and we parsed out those issues that we were encountering, like by way of there was a focus group that was held with practitioners. There was just all sorts of this discourse that we're taking in, and then juxtaposing that with the code of ethics, and consolidating it into a few easy to remember guidelines for planners when they're approaching or dealing with rolling out of generative AI within their respective departments. And so that's focused on planning practice in general, but some of the guiding principles, I think, still ring true in most areas of professional practice. So that's sort of the conversation we're engaged in right now, and we'll be likely publishing a blog post later on this year, likely before the National Planning Conference. So that's basically a summary of what we're up to.
That's great. That's great. All right. So in the spirit of finding ways into this conversation, let's do another quick round that's really more about kind of trends and issues that you're working on. And Matt, again, let's start with you. And I just want to preface this by saying, I am observing a number of cities across the country rolling out very specific policies for their employees with respect to how AI is actually used in their daily work. City of Boston, I think, is most prominent of them. So, as you're thinking, next 6, 12 months, or what are the kind of issues that you're kind of prioritizing as you think about the deployment of AI across the city?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And like you said, there have been cities, a lot of cities so far that have come out with, and states too, that have come out with policies and guidelines. So I think, we're in the midst of working at that and looking at what other cities and states are doing, and trying to really come up with a thoughtful way to guide agencies to really make use of AI in government and do it in a obviously responsible and ethical way, because we work with residents, and we also have to improve our own internal business services. We have to do that in a way that will ultimately produce benefit for the city. So when ChatGPT the first one that kind of came around, we had people would come and ask me, and can I put my stuff in ChatGPT? I'm like, absolutely not. Because people didn't understand the risks, right? It was a great tool. People were showing it off, but if you take some data with PII in it and you put it in there, you're never getting it back, and you don't know where it's going. So, at first, I think we need to be very cautious and wait and see how things played out. I think a lot of times private sector was kind of driving the direction, and the government was really just kind of waiting and seeing. But now it's moved a little bit, and we're really working on thinking about how we can give guidance to our agencies and the various mayor's offices. There's over 100 of them. So we've got to think about how we can apply something across the board and thoughtfully think about that, because ultimately, at the end of the day, in order for us to help the residents, we also have to sort of be able to help ourselves and make sure we do that in a way that's secured, and give folks an environment that, they will feel comfortable and safe using these tools. Because ultimately, as we've heard, there are biases and impacts, and we need to be able to examine the risk and mitigate those, to the best of our ability. So we're really fairly serving the residents and the businesses around the district.
And just kind of like a very practical question, is that you in your office, or is that a broader initiative across the whole government? How do you effectuate that?
Yeah, so I think a lot of agencies have looked to us as sort of part of the role of the Office of the Chief Technology Officer. Is we are to some degree a service provider, right? We provide network, we provide cybersecurity, we provide data. So much like anything like that, I think there's a little bit of an expectation for us to provide AI platforms, AI solutions, not exclusively to us. And we don't necessarily want to tell agencies they can't do certain things, but I think we have to provide that overarching guidance and governance, because I think that they do look to us as a service provider. So, you know, we are in working coordination with a lot of different folks across the city to really, you know, get thought partners as far as like what that guidance actually looks like at the end of the day, and how do we distribute it to agencies and ensure not only that we distribute it, but help agencies follow that. Because it's sometimes we can put something out, but we have to ensure that folks are doing the right thing with it once we put it out there.
Chris, you already talked about this transition to prediction. Why don't you expand a little bit more on that? Where are you going over the next?
Yeah,
you know,
and maybe
12 to 18 months?
I'll generalize that out to say, you know, would be what I'm thinking about in that category is when I think about this world of prediction. So I don't live in a world, I mean, there's a piece of my world that gets all into generative stuff, and I can get all concerned that I'm assessing the sustainability of somebody who's using a generative AI that's being read by another AI, and it's like a snake eating itself, and that's a whole world, and that's actually a real thing that can happen to us. But the thing that I think is more interesting intellectually is this transition to AI changes why we collect data, and it changes because fundamentally data becomes training sets. That's not why and how we collected data historically. We collected data to know about the state of the world, and like the Chesapeake Bay or traffic or something. Now we're trying to collect data to which their purpose is to build a model. And it becomes even more important in a different way that those data are representative, and we know what they're representative of, and we know what, because when we were using them maybe in the before times, we were trying to use them to fit a statistical model where there was an underlying hypothesis and we could interpret it, where there was maybe a physical model or a social model, and there was a why underneath it. These new AI-driven models, there is no why. The why is emergent from the data you give it. So, and that means that if your data has false negatives or false positives, or is not representative of the broader phenomenon, or you collect it here and apply it there, the generalizability are big issues. So the intellectual challenge is not the AI part. It's the collection of data that's going to be the right data to solve the problem you have. And in a robust representative, you have to understand the data. That's your point of control. So I'm spending a lot of time wondering about that and going, are we really doing that? How do we do that? How do we sustain that? How does it look different than what we've always captured? And I find that to be a cross-cutting concern, whether we're trying to predict water use or waste or occupant comfort or fatalities. It's this data representativeness problem. And I think I'm struggling also intellectually as someone who's teaching others to say, okay, how do we equip people to understand that and to be a professional in that setting? So that's one of the things that kind of, not say keeps me up at night. In some ways, it's just intellectually invigorating. It's also intimidating. Food for thought.
Thank you. Katie, I'm wondering if you can help us take a step back and then do that in order to take a step forward. And this is a question particular, and you've written a book just about this city. And I'm wondering if you can talk about why Washington, D.C. has been such a target for the deployment of new technologies, and what might that mean looking forward?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So it turns out DC has been a model both for AV companies, for AI companies, as well as sort of more ordinary things like Uber, Lyft, Instacart, GoPuff, DoorDash. Okay, the litany of those things. And part of the reason is the way that we are regulated. Because we have a very small, let's say, state legislature of 13 DC council members and a mayor's office, we are set up in a way in which these companies, whatever it is they want to have legislated, they can come and get it here with really low investment. We're cheap at the end of the day. And so when these companies come in, they can try out a new model, whatever rule it is they want, and it doesn't cost them a lot to get it legislated. When they go to places like Texas, they have to worry about, let's say they get Houston to adopt a model. Well, it turns out that the state legislature in Austin might overrule them. And so they then have to worry about something called, they try to enact something called state preemption. This is very popular right now with a lot of tech companies coming out of Silicon Valley, which is trying to limit the ability of cities and planners to do their job. And what I mean by that is through state preemption, a lot of these companies that are promoting AI in city use are trying to limit the ability of cities to regulate the use of it. And so the reason DC becomes so attractive is we don't have an overarching state that could undo any law that was already adopted here. So once you get it through the first race, you're done. And so it's why it's interesting, even though we don't have a lot of AVs on the road, you better believe that DC was really important to AV companies creating a model legislation that they pick up and drop off across the country.
And how does that, so that's been the past, right? And to some extent the present. How does that fit with emerging issues that you're tracking?
I mean, it makes DC a really hotbed of contestation and questions about who should plan what and who should make decisions. And it's really sort of bothersome to watch policymakers who are deeply invested in DC's well-being sort of put their hands up in the air and say, oh, I'm sort of overloaded with data. Who needs more of it? I don't want to collect it. I don't want to study it. As part of this recent book that I published, which followed 40 Uber drivers in DC as they moved on and off the app over 5 years, we also interviewed 35 local policymakers and followed them for 5 years as they were contending with questions about big data and platforms and new technologies. And it was hard to hear a lot of them say, like, data to what end? What are we going to do with all that data? Will it actually enable us to make better decisions? Will it enact better citizen engagement or civic action? And a lot of them worried, as I do, about the extent to which these huge data sets end up cutting public accountability. What I mean by that is that if we want public accountability, sometimes these data sets become a, what's the word, a red herring? They end up sort of becoming an excuse. Oh, well, this is what the data says, you know, as opposed to sort of an engaged conversation about what we want and need.
Thank you. Lee, in addition to your work on the national committee looking at ethics, you're also deeply engaged in urban resilience and issues of climate change. How does this all fit for you? What are issues that you're looking at or working on that are going to play out over the near future?
So, looking at the intersection between AI and urban resilience, it's kind of a varied landscape, and there's so many ways where this technology can touch on the way that we respond to climate impacts. Just thinking about 2 examples right off the top of my head. You know, there are firms that specialize specifically in using this technology to get better insight out of aerial imagery. You know, better definition of boundaries allows you to analyze, you know, traffic flows. And you've mentioned some of the technologies there that are being implemented, or rather firms that are implementing this technology. But then there's also another aspect to this, which is, you know, from a social standpoint as well. So you see that sort of captured in, like, you know, the insights from public input processes, et cetera. And then just to maybe go back into, you know, how this is related to this urban resilience issue. I think that, you know, when you look at how these firms are implementing this technology, it sort of feeds back into a bigger picture and a better picture of what the on-the-ground conditions are, and then in turn, what they will be, and in turn, how we can plan for those conditions and make smart investments at the public agency level, but also at the private in the private sector as well. So I think there's just a lot of possibility. There are a lot of places where, you know, this technology will shape the way that we make decisions in the future. And there's a lot of potential, but then there's also a lot of potential for inequity. So, you know, these are things that should be thought about, in the course of deciding to procure the technology, but also in the course of using it and using it for the purpose of decision making. So I realize this is a little bit high level, but it's just because, it touches on so many different areas of planning practice. It's like, to give just a few examples, is like just touching the surface of, how it all sort of funnels into ultimately where we end up built environment wise in the future.
That's great. Frederic, let's take this opportunity to have a little timeout here, and give you a chance to kind of react to what you've heard so far.
Yeah.
How does this relate to other conversations in the series? And well, we know you're not a professional urban planner. We know that you do live in a city, so you're not an innocent bystander here.
Well, first of all, I must say that the concerns that have been raised so far are very, I would say, similar than other concerns that have been raised in other series, so other events of the series. I would like also to, how can I say that? Maybe like reposition a little bit the topic of AI in terms of presenting that with maybe a broader perspective, right? So when we look at AI, it's a very extensive field of different type of application, different type of AI. Like I think that someone mentioned on the panel that like the city already is using AI, and like to the surprise of some, right? So that they're really like living in that environment. So this AI is certainly helping to bring some stability and some, performing streamlinedness in processes and those kinds of things. It's interesting though to see that right now in terms of like questioning, there's a lot of issues, a lot of questions, and a lot of people thinking about, how should we govern AI, like whatever it is, the industry, like what are the governance models out there that we could implement, that we can follow? What kind of like like the first thing that comes up in my mind, it's a NIST, for AI, or, or at least having NIST think a little bit more about AI, governance models and things like that. Europe is kind of leading the way on the legal side. The US is lagging behind, of course. But it's interesting to see that there's also, I would say, models of compliance that are getting out as well. So I know, for example, organizations that are dedicated to develop training for complying, not necessarily to laws, because laws on AI are, not many, but much more like about best practices, about, like existing governance model in other industry that could be imported and could be replicated and so on. So that's a big area right now that is emerging, that gets a lot of attention, especially in a environment like the US, where the US tend not to legislate too much. It wants, much more like a collaboration, a coordination between the government and the private sector to have a little bit like in cybersecurity, right? We don't have a national, federal, cybersecurity law. We try to work collaboratively between the government and the private sector. I think it's probably going to be somewhere like that for the US. And so what it looks like what kind of governance model, do we need an agency doing that, and those kinds of things? That are the big questions. Now, somebody mentioned the labor impact, right? So replacing people in job, that's the real concern. But there's also a reason why AI is getting that pace right now. It's because job market, the availability of labor is a problem. Having people showing to work, or people at, like wanted to learn those things and learn that job and doing it, is shrinking. Like we have industries that cannot even hire anyone if they decided to do that this week. It's very difficult. So there's also like a gap here that AI is kind of filling. I'm speaking from a perspective of cybersecurity, right? We have a problem. We have a high demand for cybersecurity professional, but people don't like to go study computer science. They don't like computer engineering. They don't, they are not attract to that naturally. People will go through, history or, like other field, other disciplines, but they won't necessarily go by masses and legion to computer science. So that's a major problem. And right now, what you see in cybersecurity, it's a lot of automatization of, cybersecurity surveillance, also guidance. You have like dashboard that are kind of like assisting cybersecurity professional to take care of like critical infrastructure that city may have. So those kinds of things are in response to big gap in the workforce as well. So it's not just like a one-way street. There's also a reason why AI is picking up the pace, and it's because there is a lack of labor force there. So that's something also to keep in mind. Another aspect of AI is it's not a monolithic, I would say, technology, right? So you have AI that I totally agree with you. It's black box. You cannot understand why it's spitting out that answer. We see that very often with complex model, with deep learning, for example. Those are problematic. Machine learning, like training and so on, especially when you look at large language models that are very popular right now, those are more transparent. Those are more, I would say, explainable very often because you can tag weight words and so on. So you can have a chart of, like, I'm working on a model right now, a large language model, and you can really appreciate and disclose what weight you're giving to some word for the system to react and capture and model something. So that is making it more accessible for transparency, for example. But you have other models that are more complicated, and that will be eye level too, which pose the problem of, we are talking about those machines as imperfect, and those systems being making mistake, and sometimes mistake that cost dearly to communities and so on. But at the end of the day, those machines are the reflection of us. They are us. We build AI system in a way that we are building thinking the way we think. And the problem is we don't know how we think. We don't. So we're venturing in that area where we're trying to build a reasoning and try to have like a, like branch tree type of reasoning that we think that it's a cascading and things like that. But in your mind, it doesn't even work like that. So, and then we're trying to ask like engineer to figure it out and all those kinds of things. So these imperfections reflect also our imperfection. The question is, at some point, can we calibrate and make a judgment in saying, this is not a machine job. This is a human decision-making process versus another one where we should say, clearly that thing is performing so well and with a better accuracy than a human being. We should go with the machine. I think we have to come to that at that level. I know that I'm far away from the city perspective, but it's just to kind of like react to overall comments and concerns about AI.
Yeah, no, that's great. And there's a number of different directions we could go right now. What I want to do is pull it back to the scale of the city, because of the legal frameworks that Katie has brought to our attention, but also the community aspect of cities. I mean, cities are where people engage. So I'm just wondering, let's just go down the line. I mean, do you see the frame of the city as particularly significant in this evolution or not? And I'll just kind of footnote that with a response to Frederic's kind of reference to thinking patterns. We know that thinking patterns are community-based. We're not individuals in isolation. We're community-based entities, and so this notion of community or the frame of the city is a conventional frame within which we act. So offering that for reflection.
Yeah, maybe I'll want to go this way. I'll start. One thing that gets me, that I find in that frame, is, so I understand so I'm not a planner. I'm a geographer who pretends to be a planner. but I understand what we do as urban problem solving. And there's two things about AI that I struggle with from an urban problem solver. There's more than two, but I'll give you two right this second. One is, you know, and we read about this in our summer New Urban Technology class, is the issue of fairness and the issue of equitability are not concepts that AI-driven models have to be supplemented to have those characteristics. Because AI models, as an example, we need decision-making process. We accept decision-making processes to be imperfect if they are fair. So we go to the legal process and we go to court. We understand that there is a process. It is fallible, it is imperfect, but we believe it to be fair. Thus, we accept it. When it comes to an AI model, the classic example is something like a credit score or a credit report, where you put a bunch of information in there, and I can't explain why Uber gets one score and I get another score. As we said, some models are transparent enough. Others are infamously intransparent. And that makes it, that idea of being that a better solution, maybe that AI-driven credit score is a better representation of Uva's risk versus my risk, but because it is, there's no rationale for it to be that way, except for it is a better fit to the data, then that is not a socially acceptable outcome. And I worry about that. And the same, so yes, you can bolt on controls around the system to add fairness, but it becomes an add-on to the system. It becomes a layer in that thing. So that's something we have to intentionally bring back, that that our human processes don't have. The other thing with fairness is the same way. I think about like the restoration of the Chesapeake Bay. We have a lot about burden sharing. How do we allocate the burden of cleaning up the bay to cities around the bay? And part of it is an equitable burden. That is not a kind of problem that AI is. And for 3 decades, we've solved it with a very bottom-up mechanistic modeling paradigm. There are many things about that AI can do better in terms of the technical outcome, but kind of fairness and equitable and transparency, which are indigenous to these processes, are not one of them. And so anyway, bottom line about all that is we can make superior decisions by blending in AI technology, but it has fundamental limits with things that make us human and the way that our local governments make decisions. We want them to be predictable. We want them to be equitable. And those are not easy talents for this technology. So that's something on my mind.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that and resonate as far as like, how do we do things fairly? But one of the things I want to shift a little bit, and it goes a little bit back to the functions of automation and jobs, is, I think residents expect things to happen quickly. They have services they need, whether it's 311 or something else. But think about in city government, there are limited staff. There's people wear a lot of hats sometimes, right? So think about the fact that the city holds job fairs. They hold them quite frequently, right? You get hundreds of people show up to these job fairs and submit their resumes, and right, who's going to go through those, right? And who's going to understand, this person belongs in that bucket, and this person goes here, and this goes in that agency. Well, these AI solutions and these automated methods can now help us really ingest all that very quickly, and then begin to allow agencies and folks to say, okay, I'm looking for my team needs a Python developer with 7 years of experience and lives in the district, right? Great. Well, I've automatically just searched through 1,000 resumes, or maybe I had 1,000 from the last one, and now I can instantly match up people who really need these jobs, right? But think about if we had to do that as a manual process, right? That takes a long time. There's other examples, maybe someone like a caseworker for a child and family services. Maybe they have an incident that they have to look at, and they have to go back to other cases that they worked on or that the agencies worked on, and summarizing all that can take a lot of time, right? So if we've got these tools that can really provide a streamlined process, I think that we're really impacting people's lives a lot quicker. And and to that point, not some things will have to be looked at in terms of equity and how that works, but there are a lot of kind of, I don't want to say low-hanging fruit, but there are a lot of things we can really do very quickly that will really benefit very quickly, and people won't have to wait to get jobs or to get responses to 301 or get their kids help. We can do that fairly quickly with some of these new AI solutions and automation.
And just to respond to that, I mean, totally, and several agencies are doing that right now. The only thing, and I know it's much more like previous models, but it's still, but government doesn't transform itself at a light speed, so it takes some time to adopt new things. So just to do the devil's advocate right here, you have the other way around, since we're talking about fairness, is optimizing your resume for the resume to be picked up by the. So that's also, like, for example, we have like students that wants to apply for intelligence agencies and federal agencies here in the area. And they have to sit with our faculty and say, okay, you're using the wrong word. That's the qualificative you want here. It's this, because that's where the model is. So that's in the same time, like, we have to be careful at those kinds of things. And if we're adopting that, we have to be transparent about like the sensitivity of the model, so you have a fair chance to be picked up by the search or the queries about. So that's a thing. Like, again, like, it's always a good thing, but there's always some.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of things going on in government where, again, we're not just rolling out solutions. We're trying to look at both sides of the coin, because just to your point, some of these things we can be very transparent about, and some of the things what we roll out, we have to understand what we're doing, because if we don't, we get to your point where it's like, well, we use this word instead of that word, and that affected maybe who got a job or something like that. So yeah, it's we have to look at both sides of the coin in anything we sort of release out there.
Yeah.
So and this is sort of playing off of this idea too, where use of this technology also helps to optimize processes. There's this concept, or I'm trying to figure out what the right term is to describe it. For now, I've been calling it like organizational debt, which is something that's incredibly prevalent in government, in large organizations in general, where there's a task that needs to be done, and it is done in a sort of slapdash sort of way in order to get it out the door, and then that sort of compounds. This sounds familiar because it's sort of hinging on this idea of technical debt, but it's something that occurs every time you pass a new policy. You create the need to do more. There's more administrative process behind every policy you pass. So that the potential for AI to sort of pick up the slack, not to say that government employees are not working tirelessly. I used to be one, I know, but that being said, there's so much potential for just monotonous processes to be sort of taken up, and then with a bit of human oversight, yes, it creates the capacity to do so much more when you're working with even more, increasingly less in terms of human capital. So that being said, though, what I'm really excited about is like looking or thinking about this from the perspective of like the built environment from city planning, is like how AI is going to change the way that we think of like what a city is, what do we think a city should be, and what a city will ultimately become. And when I say city, I don't necessarily just automatically mean Washington, D.C. or any major metropolitan area. I mean, something, it could be something as small as like your own neighborhood block. But the relationships, the infrastructure, the both digital and physical, and when I say relationships, I mean the human relationships, the physical aspects of the built environment, all of that is suddenly, it's suddenly easier to conflate it all or understand it all as a whole, as opposed to looking at it in discrete parts. And so if there's something significant about your neighborhood block that differentiates it, for example, from the block 2 blocks, maybe a couple of streets down, it's suddenly a little bit easier to understand what makes that unique versus, that place a little bit farther away. And that may not seem significant, but when you think about something as simple as defining the boundaries of a neighborhood, those differentiating features could be the difference in tax funding for schools. It could be the difference in turn like learning outcomes, like lifetime, like long-term longitudinal studies of how people's lives they began on this block and how they progressed, and have they been able to achieve what they've wanted to achieve or what they could achieve in life as a result of where they live. So there's some real interesting implications, like from the now going into the future, when you think about how we understand this built environment and how we apply that new knowledge that we've gleaned from this emerging technology. And then further, there's just one more point I want to make. There's this concept of, we're fixated on this concept of AI specifically, but I think what we should be more excited about or more focused on is the concept of governance, specifically digital governance, because AI is not where everything stops. It's not where you know, humanity's achievements, like we're not at our peak. I don't think we're at our peak. So I just think that, you know, we should be excited about this, but we should also be thinking about what comes after this new, you know, this new approach really to AI that we've stumbled upon in the last 2 or 3 years, or the reemergence of AI, because after a long period of you know, things being done a certain way. So I'll close with that though.
Great. So really interested in any reactions to this issue of digital governance, and specifically how the, you know, a place-based or community-based frame for discussing that leads to greater trust in data sets. And while we kind of get some reactions to that, after that, I'll turn to the audience if anybody has any questions. So how does governance and trust intersect with place and community?
I can speak a little bit to that. I'll do it very quickly. So thinking about the role of somebody who works in local government, who's entrusted with certain information that might be sensitive, like you mentioned PII earlier. We, as a planner or as somebody who works in local government, you know, we have a responsibility to the general public to, you know, protect that information, to ensure that, you know, nothing, it's not leaking outside, it's not being exposed, it's not being exploited. And so, you know, that's sort of where the imperative for, you know, responsible planning of the digital infrastructure in tandem with the physical infrastructure, because, you know, hardware is a thing, not just hardware, but, you know, utilities and what have you. And we're now looking at connected buildings. So that's another tangent that we can go down some other time. But that's where it starts. It starts with that strategic approach to addressing the emerging technologies and new ways that this information could be operationalized, but also, again, exploited in a negative way. So that's my response.
Katie?
Great. Can I ask how many people are DCPS parents in the room? Okay. A few of us received emails this week about Raptor Technologies and about the data breach this week. Already DCPS, as long as a host of agencies, as I mentioned, are using AI. DCPS is using it now for automated responses to excessive absences or tardiness for children. The question for me, and what really worries me when I think about community and the relationship to AI, is about the power imbalance. Data is a new oil, and we are producing a ton of it, and for whom, and at what cost? And I think already my child's tardiness, right, has gone to this company, right? Not Raptor, a different company, right? And they own it and they have it, and what's going to happen to it? And I think that when we think about the power and the ownership of AI, the community holds nothing. We are but data producers. And I think that even DC government, right? And Matt, you can maybe talk about this relationship to third-party contract and, you know, providers of some of this technology. I mean, we hold such a little power. And so my fear about what digital governance is, right, is echoing out? No, what's the word? Emptying out of urban governance.
I'll follow on that for a second. There's a lot written on that. There's such a interesting literature on that issue of the distinct responsibilities that local governments have because people can't opt out. We read some of this in the summer, and I get excited about that. But the thing that I wanted to add, maybe just from the urban planning context, is you were saying we produce a lot of data. I'm not sure we produce nearly the right data. And the part about this that I want to bring back to is a different way of thinking about trust. Trust, someone with, you know, it's kind of a common turn of phrase of saying, trust doesn't mean that you trust in folks to do the right thing. Trust comes from being able to predict it. So to be political, I have a fair degree in trust that I understand what Donald Trump is going to do the next time I hear him speak. I don't like it, but it's very trustworthy to me because, and not trust in the sense that it's like something I want, but I can predict the outcome, good or bad. It's very consistent in that way. What I'm saying is, I think urban planning fundamentally has a trust problem because we traditionally, as a discipline, have been essentially fire and forget. We generate a plan, we generate a design, we toss it into the world, and we rarely look to see if it works. So we don't have the DNA that is required to make AI the best it can be. We are not, as a discipline, particularly trustworthy. We are well-intentioned. We are, unfortunately, faddish. We don't look back. We don't explain what we thought was going to happen. And the act of having a hypothesis, confronting that with data, and then iteratively refining it is what makes you trustworthy. And so when I think about the discipline of planning, I think we have to ask ourselves how we change our own pattern of practice so that we can become more trustworthy in a world that expects it in different ways. And that is a bit of a hard look in the mirror for a profession that historically didn't have this as its core. And that's something I grapple with.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, right? A lot of something I don't personally believe in is our data brokers, right? It's a big thing now where people are maybe not aware they're opting into services. Potentially their data is being used to track locations. Again, these things, ideally they help build synthetic models and other things like that. And people are not aware of what they're doing. So I think is our responsibility is for governments personally, like, what I believe in, I don't believe in that kind of data broker kind of the world. And I do think, especially now with AI, right? One of the things that I think we'll have to be very careful about is we do need the transparency, and we need our transparency, not just to residents and the public and the citizens, but we also need that from our vendors, right? So we really have an understanding of, in order for the public to trust us and for residents to trust what we're doing with these services and kind of what you mentioned, we also have to build that relationship with the third parties we're working, right? So if you're going to be introducing a software package or whatever, a tool, a solution, what is that tool doing and how does that doing it? And right, and I think the reality is there are, and maybe more previously than now, but a lot of those vendors don't want to reveal that secret sauce, right? And and it to some degree it's well, okay, if you're not going to reveal that to us, then there's a likelihood that we may not work with you, right? Because of that transparency. So I think we have to continue to look at that as part of our procurement practices in the city and how we think about while the tool may be fantastic and do some really cool things, if we can't engage that trust about what we're doing with your data, if you're giving it to us and we're putting in this tool, then maybe you're not the right tool for us.
We have a question here, Chetty. Please introduce yourself. And
Shadi Abu Zaid, I'm also with Professor Frederic in the program AI. Quick question for you, Katie. I remember Robert F. Kennedy said something very important a long time ago. And he said, our GDP does not measure our happiness. It does not measure our education. It does not measure our health. And the same thing now what's happening is with AI is like we think that AI is the holy grail. And with it, I think the people on the street, they're losing trust even more now, because now we're saying, oh, let's ask AI to give us solution to the problems that have been persisting for decades now. And I think this is what's happening. We're creating societies whereby the gap and the wedge between what people want and what politicians or decision makers are able to deliver is increasing. And unfortunately, now we have a new toy to blame. We say, oh, it's AI's fault. And that's the environment that we are creating. We're seeing it day in, day out in every single facet of our world. As you said, the data of your child, the data of my daughter, all our kids' data is available in one way or the other. And it has been exploited today and will be exploited in the future. How do we look at, all of you talked about governance, but no one is taking any action. Where do we start? Yourself, you're working in an organization that deals with, I would suspect, trillions of data sets and so forth. Who said that this data is actually not biased, as Professor Lemieux said? and all of these things. Who's taking these, putting these guardrails to help us think and close this gap and increase the trust in anything that we are doing when AI becomes more prevalent?
Yeah, please.
I love that question. And I love the word guardrails, right? For thinking about how we can set them up and how other places have done a demonstrably better job of it. But I think that, right, how do we, I mean, this is a question about urban politics. How do we do it and where do we start? One of the things I love about UVA's program here, right, that you guys are all building is this idea of engaged citizenship. How do you be, get involved in your neighborhood, right? For as DCPS parents, right? One thing that a colleague of mine, Meg Lita Jones, over at on Hill, what do you call it? Hilltop main campus, the real Georgetown. She's been really trying as a DCPS parent to find out what AI and what data is in her particular school in Stoddard. She can't figure it out. She's tried to get the PTA involved, trying to get the HSA, the LSTAT. They cannot figure it out, right? And so I think there's lots of places to start. I am inspired by groups like EPIC. There's other groups like Data and Society. There are groups like AI Now. Uva mentioned Kate Crawford as a fabulous scholar on these things. I mean, there is a chorus. I'm really heartened by the work of Signal and Meredith Whitaker and other people sort of arguing for a kind of data safety and security and privacy. So I think the conversation is shifting in a positive way, in a way in which I don't think 6-7 years ago we would have sat around and I would have said, oh my God, I love the chorus. Whereas now I can point to one.
Can I build on one thing that I made kind of in terms of reflection on who takes responsibility? I want to also drive that to something that you were just saying about kind of vendor selection. You're like, okay, how does this apply? One of the things that, in a way, we're all making a vendor selection. Here's what I mean by that. Is, one of the most pervasive issues of AI is the way that ads are served to us in a search engine, right? And we have tacitly decided as a society that we prefer to pay with our data, to pay with our privacy, and get free search. We've all selected the vendor. We did this to ourselves because that is our preference. And when we say, I'm going to stick up for, I'm going to, not allow those vendors to use that data, I'm going to enforce it. All right, that's pretty cool. It's pretty novel because the rest of us, hundreds and millions and billions of us, have decided to go the other way. And it's really hard when it gets down to that point of saying, I'm going to pay that higher fixed cost, that higher first cost, and not let that other entity monetize the data in that way. And I'm not totally sure we know which way we really want that to go, because our actions suggest that we're pretty quick to give up the privacy in favor of the free good, but we know that free good wasn't free. We paid for it the other way. And so I don't know. I'm still just going to throw that out there, saying our collective action is either as individuals or collectively as bit suspect.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Chris. I mean, if we just turn the clock back 100 years, one of the primary value propositions of moving to the city was anonymity.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, right?
And that was obviously we read this for class, right? That there's that moment of anonymity that Jane Jacobs' world was a blip. What was it, a blip? Right. And or is it just anyway? I think it's a fascinating topic.
Yeah. Okay, we've got a couple of quick questions. We're in lightning round now, so keep it short.
Sure. Hi. Thank you for allowing me to join. My name is
Introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Arya. I'm a research principal at Gartner and a MBA student at Georgetown McDonough. I love, Katie, your point about digital governance and trust. We have none of it. That's kind of what I wrote down here, and it's unfortunate. But also tie it back to the automated decision-making practices that we've been describing here. My question is, one of the best practices that I've been hearing from some of the clients I work with and some of the research I'm reading in the market is this concept of a human in the loop, right? Having a kind of a guardrail per se, somebody who can escalate, or ways that we can classify data and information to understand the level of priority, the level of risk, potential exposure, and potential consequences that result from that exposure. So I'd love to understand anything you might have on that human in the loop concept, whether it's familiar to you or anything that might be adjacent to it.
Right, and I'm going to moderate the answers. Lee, why don't you respond to that? And I'm particularly thinking about the role as planner as a navigator.
You mean in terms of
Synthesizing data, making data,
Right. making sense of those
relevant,
insights.
yes.
So I think I can start maybe with an anecdote this is sort of like in the investment decision making space where you know, you might get licenses as whatever firm you're at. You might get a series of licenses for climate risk analytics platforms, right? And those platforms will output a risk score. And those risk scores might be different because they might be all based on like the same general model, but they might take different data inputs. Like that's all like based on a bunch of proprietary data sources. Yes, it's going to flood here. You're going to have a wildfire over here. And then those risk scores, because they don't all line up, they create a little bit of a problem, right? Because it's going to require a bit of human intervention. And so the general practice in cases like that is you've got those 3 risk scores. And based on those 3 risk scores, if they don't all seem to line up, that is a flag that you need to go and investigate and like get a better idea as to where really is this risk coming from? Why does it say there's a score of 6 over here and 38 over here for the same asset? So thinking about the decision-making process for planners, like in the city, similarly, if you are working in a GIS platform and you have a data set, let's say you're using just a series of just an amalgamation of data that you've collected. You know, you've got somebody out collecting information about the condition of trees, and then you've got some other data sets that talk about like land cover classification or what have you, and you're trying to figure out, you know, maybe something about you know, urban heat island effect, and get a good idea as to like where should we prioritize like what locations within the city should we prioritize for whatever public improvements, and how much money should we put in? And that could be in and of itself an extremely complex model. Making that decision about, you know, whether to hit go on investment in like bus shelter or like sheltered bus stops, for example, or cooling stations, or you know, or maybe even a resilience hub in a particular location is not something that should ever be done purely with the input or the raw output of an AI system or machine learning system or whatever it is that you're using, right? There needs to be human insight. And then once you've got your options, it can give you a starting point, but it's not going to get you 100% of the way there. It's definitely not going to get you through the permitting process. So there's always going to be an element of human intervention, I think, in the planning process. And you know, to your point about risk mitigation, I think the same can be true, right? There should always be like some place, and where those places are is TBD on the process, but where a person is looking at this information and then they're comparing it with their intuition and their insight and their knowledge, their experience, their guidelines, legislative guidelines in some cases possibly. And then they are using those insights to fuel that decision. It's not the other way around. So
That's great. Very quick question. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Carmen Dominguez. I'm a White House Presidential Innovation Fellow. I have also data scientist and science communicator. My reason for raising my hand is not so much a question, but more sort of like a counter argument and a little bit of devil's advocate comment. Christopher, you mentioned that, you know, we kind of make choices, right? When we choose to go into a search website and make that search, right? Sure, we can choose option A, option B, option C. But I'll argue that sort of like in modern day society, a lot of these quote unquote choices that we're making are not really choices. A lot of times we don't have an option, right? So if we're focused about like, you know, urban planning, if I moved into a new apartment and I want to sign up for my utilities, my water, my gas, right, bills, I have to go on a website and sign up through there. And even if I choose to like call in instead, I don't know what kinds of systems my data is going to be put into, who is going to end up having access to that data, right? What kind of contractor is going to be hired by that utility company and so on. Same thing with like, you know, I moved into a new building, they now have a system to like take in my packages and like notify. I didn't have a say in it, right? I don't make that choice. And, you know, nowadays, like a lot of basic services that we need to live in the modern society, we need to sign up through some system. And even if we choose them as analogical as possible option, we don't have say into what happens down the line with our data. So just kind of throwing that out there. And, if you talk about
100.
children, even more so, right? Like they don't have a choice.
100%. I'll just agree with you to say there is two different literatures. There's literature on things that are institutional, like local government, where you can't opt out. Like you need these services. You go to the DMV, you got to put your stuff in, higher obligation. And then there are services to which there is a choice. We can always argue that Google has now reached a different place, and
Yeah.
totally agreed. And the literature reflects that.
All right, last question here.
Hi, this has been a really great conversation. My name is Vinny Mono, and I also work at Octo. The question that I want to raise up with this panel is the concept of a smart city, right? So we started with, not this panel specifically, but since like 2013, the IoT of things. And then it was like, oh, great, like just things, IoT tends pretty much happening in the background. No one's talking about that anymore. And then now the whole rise of AI, and then 5 years from now, AI is going to be in the back of it's going to be happening in the back. And then we're going to talk about the Elon Musk robots, just walking around and doing this thing. And so my question to you is, within a smart city, I know that DC hasn't implemented smart vehicles yet, but that's probably going to happen next 10 years or so, due to legislation. So my question to you is, as a person who lives in the city, how can you help me navigate this new rise of having AI just happening in the back? And I'm not talking about data points within the key fobs, data points within me just walking in and going to Starbucks. I'm talking about the things that I'm not aware about that's going to be revolutionizing how I navigate the city life. And so I'm interested in hearing your thoughts in, those things are happening in the back in the next 5 years. And how can I be a more advocate and smart member of the community I live in within the city? Thank you.
Great. All right. So let's use that question as the basis for our final round here. So I'd like everyone to respond to that. And as you do, are we at a moment of inflection, or is this a gradual evolution? Who wants to start? Yeah, go ahead.
So there's this when people mention smart city, I always think about it as like a paradigm. It's like an ideal. I think that concept is something that is going to be ever evolving. I think it's going to be a question of, I don't think it's necessarily going to converge for any particular locality. I think there's always going to be like one service provider for one particular thing that's going to be more appropriate in a particular geographic context or political context versus another. So I don't think it's ever going to become normalized just across every locality across the world. So every time you step into a new municipality, you're dealing with a new set of systems, a new set of assumptions, and being aware that this is sort of underlying is in and of itself a tool. So, for example, if you were searching for something simple like you want to find a restaurant, right? Just on Google Maps, the results that you get via Google Maps will be different in Shanghai versus in Washington, D.C., right? And the way that those results are calculated may be different. You may not even be using Google's maps, but understanding that, that it will be different and that it's not homogeneous. You're dealing with, again, an amalgamation of different systems. Will give you a sort of a weapon for becoming more adaptable in these different contexts. And you'll know that these are the sorts of questions that you might need to be asking, like, is this the right search engine given my geographic context? And going back into this same example. So that's my little piece of advice, I guess. That's
great. Katie, inflection. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I mean, just to go on your questions and talk about previous technology, those technologies did not go anywhere. In fact, they are more part of our current life. Like, for example, IoTs, we don't talk about it because it's everywhere. It's, like we don't talk about cloud computing anymore because it's not new. It's part of the environment. So AI, as we know it today, is it's the steam engine back in the days. We're about to go into the nuclear age of AI very soon. And what we're debating right now is, I mean, it's coming. You know that right now the big problem that scientific are running into is not data. It's the computational power to operate AI, right? So that's the main issue right now. And that's what they're trying to work on. That's why you will hear probably more and more about, quantum physics and quantum computing and those kinds of things, or more powerful computer, because AI will need that kind of computing. Like AI capability doubles every 4 months. Computing powers every 18 months. So there's a problem here in terms of, so yes, it will run in your background. In 2 years, 3 years, you will not even have the same conversation or the same question that you have right now, just because it will be integrated. It will be working for you. It will be, or sometimes not working for you, but it's something that is there to, I would say, continue. AI feels, when I teach my students that view AI as an enhancement of all your senses, or aspect of your community, because we're talking about city and community. It's nothing else than that. It's an enhancement. Now, shall we attribute AI some human quality or human expectation? I think that's where we're making a mistake. I think that's where we should not go. This is, like serving our community as an entity. I think we should be really careful about that. We should not expect from AI the same ability than a human being, right? And just to put that in perspective, to make a connection with city, remember, like a couple of years ago, we were facing a subtle ethical dilemma. We're saying, like, is the AI will kill the passenger in the car, or will kill that mom with her 3 kids going through the intersection? I'm talking about the automated vehicle. Remember that how many times when you were passing your tests for having your driver's license were you asked that question? Will you kill yourself, or will you squish those people? I mean, you see what I mean? So we are asking AI sometime to be better than human, as we're not even exploring those dilemmas for ourselves. So that's one problem, that we should not expect AI to be so human. It's just to helping us as a tool. You ask a human in the loop. Well, human in the loop can be a problem. I can tell you that. Amazon had a problem of gender diversity, and they asked an AI, please help us to resolve the problem. And it ended up that the AI exacerbated the gender problem in the leadership of Amazon. And the problem was that the AI was only searching on the keywords that the HR team put in there, right? So replicating what the human was doing, and that was it. So in this particular case, the human in the loop were just, exacerbating the problem here. So what you'll probably be looking for is a better validation process, decision processes, validation involving human, but something more robust, something that is more robust than the model itself. And that is, like, often a bigger problem. But those are the things. So to come back to your question, is it will be there, it will stay there, it will improve. Big questions about AI and its implication for community individuals will just increase, because its presence and its prevalence will just increase with time. I mean, we don't trust many institutions. We turn to internet to give us answers. It's not, I mean, you want symptoms, you doctor yourself over Google, because, like, you don't have the time, you cannot wait, ER is full, the system doesn't work for you, so you will find us. I mean, we are geared to act like that, and that's why we're adopting so fast those kinds of technology. Yeah.
Okay, very quickly, Katie, inflection, evolution.
Yeah, absolutely. So Vinny, that question about how to be a smart advocate, right? I think that what I want to say here, right, is that given the fact that we care about urban life, presumably, and the world is on fire, it is impossible for me to think that 5 years from now, we are not absolutely focused on the environmental consequences of AI. The amount of water required to cool the service, to answer the questions of ChatGPT, of what you can make with an eggplant, a squash, and 2 tomato sauces in your fridge is astounding. Right? It makes growing almonds look like, a water resource friendly activity. And so as I think about what the future is, I hope that the conversation about AI is about the extent to which it really is compatible with sustainable urban life. And I worry that it's not.
Thank you. Chris and then Matt.
I'll be super brief. Solve more problems than you create. The short version is, I think a lot of times our technology is solving the problems that it created versus being accretive to solving real problems. A lot to unpack with that, but I'll just leave it there, saying if AI can be part of the toolkit to solve more problems than it creates, net win. We're not necessarily at that inflection point.
That's great. Matt.
Yeah, I mean, well, probably see you tomorrow in the office, but anyway. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? I think we can do a lot to really educate ourselves about AI, right? And how it is affecting the lives of ourselves and our family and our friends, and maybe, just sort of a general awareness about the things it's really going on in the city that AI is really partaking in, and whether, we're really, if we're participating in it, whether it's by choice or not, we really have just a good understanding of how it's changing our lives, right? And how it's affecting your daily life and your family and everything else. And what can you do at least to just be aware of it and kind of educate yourself? Because obviously it's not a new technology. Maybe the generative portion is, but it's been around since the 50s. So whether it's an evolutionary, I think it is. Is it inflection? Maybe with some of this, ChatGPT kind of stuff, maybe it is, right? So I think it's a little bit of a mix of both, depending on how you look at it. But I think it really, people just really need to keep an eye on it and really have to educate themselves and understand it, just like everything else we've been doing with the IoT. It was here and it was a big thing, and now it's just kind of in the background. This could be the same thing, but it could also be as transformative a technology as email, right? I mean, it's got that potential to some degree. So just thinking about it in those terms.
That's great. Please join me in thanking our speakers tonight. Really great. Thank you so much. Fantastic. And I think true to form, we've asked a lot of questions. There's so much road ahead, so many questions we need to grapple with, and you've provided incredible insight into that. So thank you so much for joining us here tonight. Thank you, especially Matt, for joining us from the city. And with that, I'd like to bring this event to a close. Thank you so much.